The numbers on that lottery ticket didn't just glow, they burned into my eyes, searing themselves into my brain. I kept blinking, thinking maybe I had read them wrong, maybe it was some cruel trick of the light. But no, they were real. $50 million. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The world around me went silent, like someone had pressed pause on everything. My knees gave out, and I had to grab the edge of the table just to keep from collapsing. Before continue, please like this video and subscribe to my channel. That's free and only way to support us. Thank you. All my life I had been scraping by, patching holes in shoes, working overtime shifts just to make sure the bills were paid and the fridge wasn't completely empty. I had been the father who always gave, always sacrificed, always bent until I was close to breaking. And for once, just once, the universe had thrown me a bone. 50 million bones, to be exact. The first thought that crossed my mind wasn't about yachts, cars, or some mansion in the hills. It was my daughter. The little girl I had raised with my bare hands, the one I had protected from storms and sickness, the one I had thought would never turn her back on me. I pictured her smile when I told her, the way her eyes would light up. I thought of her saying we'd finally made it, together. I told myself this was our second chance. All those nights when we had to share one bowl of noodles, when I had lied and said I wasn't hungry so she could eat, those were about to be stories we laughed at while sitting in a new home, maybe by a fireplace, with more food than we could ever finish. I thought of hugs, of thank yous, of her finally seeing that all the years I had carried her on my back had been worth it. But when I shared the news with her, I didn't see joy. I didn't see relief. I saw something darker in her eyes, something that made the hair on my neck stand up. Her smile was too wide, her questions too sharp. She wasn't happy for me, she was calculating. At first, she asked small things. Shouldn't I move the money into her account just in case? Shouldn't she handle the spending since she was better with numbers? I thought it was stress, that maybe she was overwhelmed. Then came the orders. Buy me this. Give me that. You owe me. Suddenly I wasn't her father anymore. I was a wallet with legs. Every word out of her mouth was coated in greed, and when I hesitated, her tone turned cold, sharp as glass. The breaking point came faster than I ever imagined. One night, when I told her I wanted to think before making decisions, she exploded. Her face twisted into something I barely recognized. She shouted that I was useless, that I didn't deserve the money, that I owed her everything for raising her right. Her words hit harder than fists, and before I could even find the strength to answer, she pointed at the door. She told me to leave. Not tomorrow, not in an hour, right then. The room felt like it spun. I had spent years dreaming of this moment, of finally being able to give her the world, and here she was kicking me out as if I was trash. My chest felt hollow, my throat dry. I wanted to scream, to shake her, to remind her of every sacrifice I had made. But I didn't. I walked out with nothing but my old jacket and the taste of betrayal burning my tongue. The night air bit into my skin, but the cold inside me was worse. The streetlight above flickered, casting my shadow long against the pavement. I realized in that moment that she thought she had won, that by tossing me aside she could still somehow claw her way to the fortune she believed was hers. But she was wrong. Dead wrong. Because I still had the ticket, the money, and more importantly, I had something she didn't expect from me, patience. I swore under that flickering streetlight that I wouldn't just walk away. I wouldn't just disappear into the dark. No, I would rise again, stronger, quieter, and far more dangerous than she ever imagined. She thought she had buried me, but she had only planted a seed. The lottery had changed my life, yes. But not in the way she thought. It didn't just give me wealth, it gave me a weapon. And I was going to use it. That night, after she kicked me out, I didn't sleep. I sat on a hard bench in a half-lit park, staring at the cracks in the concrete. Every sound of the night, cars hissing by, dogs barking, wind rattling through trash cans, felt sharper, heavier, as if the world itself was mocking me. The cold air seeped through my jacket, biting at my bones. Yet the cold wasn't half as bitter as the betrayal that still echoed in my chest. For hours, I replayed her words, her face twisted with greed, her finger pointing at the door like I was some stranger who had overstayed his welcome. My daughter. The same girl I carried on my shoulders when her shoes wore thin, the one I worked double shifts for so she could go to school, the one who once cried into my chest when she was scared of thunderstorms. That same girl had treated me like dirt beneath her feet. Please like this video and subscribe to my channel. But while the hurt gnawed at me, something else began to burn inside, a quiet fire. She thought I was finished. She thought I'd fade into the streets, penniless and broken, while she strutted around expecting the world to bow at her feet. Let her think that. Because while she counted me out, I was already counting the ways I would rise. The first step was silence. I didn't run to her neighbors, didn't scream to the world about what she had done. I played the fool she wanted me to be. I hid. And while I hid, I cashed in the ticket. $50 million moved quietly into my account. No champagne, no parades, no flashing lights. I didn't buy sports cars or a mansion. Instead, I moved like a ghost. I rented a small, cheap apartment on the edge of town, the kind of place no one looked at twice. The neighbors were too busy with their own troubles to care who I was. Perfect. From there, I started building. Lawyers, accountants, financial advisors, I gathered them like soldiers in an army. Not flashy, not loud, just smart, calculating people who knew how to turn money into power. Every meeting was another brick in the fortress I was building around myself. While she slept soundly in her borrowed comfort, I was laying foundations she couldn't see. I bought properties under names she would never trace. I invested in companies she bragged about but could never afford. I turned my silence into strength, my invisibility into advantage. She thought I was gone, but I was everywhere, hidden in paperwork, buried in contracts, scattered across accounts she could never touch. And all the while, I kept my eyes on her. I knew her habits, her lies, her debts. She paraded herself like royalty, throwing parties she couldn't pay for, borrowing from people she couldn't repay. She bragged to her friends about money she didn't have, promising them gifts and vacations as if she was already rich. She spread her arrogance like perfume, thick and suffocating, until even her closest friends began to choke on it. The more I watched, the more I realized her kingdom was nothing but sand. And I, with my quiet power, was the tide waiting to roll in. But revenge isn't built overnight. You don't plant a seed and yank it from the ground the next morning. You water it, you nurture it, you let it grow in the shadows until the roots are strong enough to crack stone. She had taught me that patience wasn't weakness, it was the sharpest weapon a man could wield. So, I waited. I let her debts pile up. I let her fake friends whisper behind her back. I let her strut, knowing the higher she climbed on her paper throne, the harder she would fall when the ground vanished beneath her. And while she played queen, I was becoming something she would never see coming, the quiet king in the shadows, biding his time, sharpening his crown into a weapon. The weeks that followed were some of the strangest of my life. By day, I lived like a man with nothing. My neighbors saw me in the same worn jacket, eating the same cheap meals, walking the streets with the slump of someone the world had beaten down. They pitied me, which worked perfectly. Pity was a cloak. It made me invisible. And invisible men can move freely. But behind that mask, I was sharpening my weapons. Every dollar of that lottery win was a soldier in my private army, and I deployed them carefully. I met with lawyers who spoke in low voices and scribbled notes on thick paper. I hired advisors who knew how to bury money so deep in investments and businesses that only I could pull the strings. And while I sat in a rundown apartment with a flickering light bulb, my fortune was multiplying in places my daughter couldn't even dream of. Meanwhile, I kept watching her. I learned more about her than I ever wanted to know. She was throwing money around like she had won the lottery herself. Designer clothes, fancy dinners, trips with friends she called her inner circle. But I knew the truth. She had no circle, only vultures circling overhead, waiting for her to drop. They smiled at her now, but I saw the way they exchanged looks when she wasn't watching, the way they whispered about her arrogance. Her debts grew like weeds. Creditors began circling too, and every week she made promises she couldn't keep. But she walked with her chin high, as if she were untouchable. She still believed I was rotting somewhere, penniless and forgotten. That belief was my greatest gift. The irony wasn't lost on me. For years, I had been the one scraping pennies while she lived off my sacrifices. Now the roles had flipped, except this time I wasn't scraping. I was building. I was sculpting her downfall with the precision of an artist. I bought the cafe she visited every morning, under a company name she'd never recognize. I purchased shares in the boutique she loved to flaunt her wealth at. I even secured quiet control over a chunk of the real estate in her neighborhood. She thought she was a queen in her castle, but piece by piece, I was becoming the ground beneath her feet. But revenge requires more than control. It requires timing. I didn't just want her to lose. I wanted her to realize she had never truly won. I wanted her to stand in the ruins of her fake kingdom and see me rise from the shadows. The hardest part was waiting. Every instinct in me screamed to reveal myself, to confront her, to demand answers for the betrayal that still echoed in my chest. But patience was my shield. I knew that if I moved too soon, the blow would not land as deep. She needed time to believe in her own invincibility, to climb so high that the fall would break her spirit completely. So, I played my part. The invisible man. The forgotten father. The poor fool she thought she had discarded. I let her laugh, I let her boast, I let her tell the world that she was destined for riches. Every word she spoke was another thread in the noose she was tying for herself. And every night, when I sat in that tiny apartment with the peeling paint, I whispered to myself the same promise. She thought she had written me out of her story. But I was only on the next page, waiting for the right moment to turn it. The mask of patience was heavy, but I wore it with pride. Because beneath it, I wasn't just a man with money. I was a storm, gathering strength, waiting to break. The first cracks appeared quietly, almost like whispers in the wind. At first, she didn't notice. Or maybe she did, but her pride wouldn't let her admit it. I watched from the shadows as her so-called friends began to pull away, one by one. The same people who clung to her for dinners, drinks, and shopping sprees now had excuses. They stopped picking up her calls, avoided her eyes at gatherings, and started whispering about her when they thought she wasn't listening. Debt collectors knocked on her door more often. She laughed them off at first, flaunting jewelry and clothes she hadn't even paid for. But I saw the nervous tapping of her fingers, the way her eyes darted when letters piled up on her table. She was drowning, but instead of swimming, she was busy waving her arms and pretending it was all part of the dance. She wanted the world to believe she was living like a queen, but queens don't borrow money from loan sharks. Queens don't pawn family heirlooms for quick cash. Queens don't wake up in the middle of the night with their hearts pounding, wondering if someone's going to bang down the door and drag them into the street. Please like this video and subscribe to my channel. I knew all of this because I made sure to know. Information became my favorite currency. I had people watching her, people feeding me details she thought no one could see. I knew where she went, who she met, what lies she told to cover her tracks. I didn't just want her to collapse, I wanted her to collapse with the whole world watching. And so I waited, watering the roots of her downfall. I tightened the leash on certain businesses she relied on without her knowing. The boutique she loved. Prices went up. The cafe she bragged about owning a tab in. Her name mysteriously vanished from their books. The apartment she boasted about. The landlord suddenly decided to sell, to a company with my signature hidden at the bottom of the paperwork. Piece by piece, her safety nets disappeared. She stumbled, caught herself, then stumbled again. I could see the cracks spreading in her kingdom, the way arrogance turned into panic when the curtains were closed. But still, she put on the act. Still, she wore her crown of lies, as if plastering on a smile could keep the walls from caving in. The irony was delicious. She thought she had cut me out of her life forever, yet I was in every corner of it. She drank coffee from my shop, walked streets lined with my buildings, tried to hide debts from people who worked for me. I was the shadow in her every step, the quiet hand pulling the strings. But revenge is sweeter when it's slow. I wasn't ready to reveal myself yet. Not while she still had a shred of confidence left. I wanted her desperate, cornered, stripped of the illusion she clung to. I wanted her to look around and realize there was no one left to call, no one left to fool, no place left to hide. One night, I walked past her building, keeping to the shadows. Through the thin curtains of her window, I saw her pacing. Her hands pulled at her hair, her phone pressed to her ear, her lips moving fast. I couldn't hear her words, but I didn't need to. I knew the language of desperation when I saw it. She was crumbling, even if she refused to admit it. And I smiled to myself, because I knew the cracks weren't just cracks anymore. They were turning into fault lines. And when the earthquake finally hit, it wouldn't just knock her down, it would bury her. I walked away from that building with a calm heart. For the first time since she kicked me out, I felt lighter. She thought I was gone, erased. But I was everywhere. She just hadn't realized it yet. Her kingdom was crumbling, and soon, very soon, I would be the one to bring the final blow. Her downfall wasn't going to be quick. Quick was mercy, And mercy was the last thing she deserved. No, I wanted every step of her descent to feel like walking barefoot on broken glass, slow, sharp, and unforgettable. By this time, her debts had ballooned beyond repair. The loan sharks who once smirked at her charm were now banging on her door, leaving red ink warnings that made her neighbors whisper. Credit card companies had stopped sending polite letters. Now their demands came with deadlines that ticked like bombs. Still, she strutted in public, face painted with fake confidence, like an actress in a play where the audience already knew the ending. But the mask slipped more often now. I saw her trembling hands, the sweat on her brow when collectors followed her home, the way her smile cracked when the bills piled up higher than the lies she told. That's when I decided to make my move. Not the final strike, that would come later, but small cuts, the kind that weaken the prey before the lion shows his face. The boutique she loved suddenly changed policies. Her account, the one she bragged about, was mysteriously locked. She tried to argue, but the manager, who now worked for me, simply shook his head and told her there was nothing he could do. The cafe she used to parade her fake wealth at stopped serving her on credit. She was forced to dig through her purse, fumbling for change while strangers watched with raised eyebrows. The humiliation painted her cheeks red, and I savored the moment from a corner table, sipping coffee while hidden behind a newspaper. Her car. Repossessed. Not because she hadn't paid, though she hadn't, but because I bought the loan company that held the papers. Watching her face as the tow truck hauled it away was like tasting the first sip of a drink you've waited years to enjoy. Piece by piece, her world shrank. Every safety net she thought she had vanished, and every time she tried to climb out, the ground crumbled under her. She thought it was bad luck, fate turning against her. She had no idea it was me, the father she had kicked out, weaving the web tighter around her. But I wasn't cruel just for the sake of cruelty. Every move had purpose. I wanted her to see the truth. Money wasn't power. Arrogance wasn't strength. She thought wealth made her untouchable, but she didn't understand that real power comes from patience, from silence, from knowing when to strike and when to wait. At night, I sat in my quiet apartment, the one with peeling wallpaper and creaky floors, and planned the final stage. The image played in my mind like a movie, her standing there, broken and desperate, realizing that the man she had thrown out into the cold had been the one holding her strings all along. But I wasn't ready yet. Not until she was at her lowest. Not until she had lost everything she thought gave her worth. Because only then would my revenge taste as sweet as it deserved to. And so, I waited in the shadows, the silent storm. She was gasping for air, and I was the tide pulling her further into the deep. Please like this video and subscribe to my channel. Her fall had gone from quiet cracks to loud collapses. The once proud queen of her self-built kingdom was now running around like a desperate actor trying to patch a sinking stage. She tried borrowing from friends, but most of them had already vanished. Those who stayed only laughed behind her back. She tried begging the banks, but her credit was worse than rotten fruit. Even the loan sharks began circling less. When vultures leave, you know there's nothing left to pick at. That's when I noticed something change in her eyes. The first flicker of suspicion. She sat at that cafe one morning, the same one where she used to flash her cards like trophies. Now, she counted coins with shaking hands, avoiding the stares of people who once envied her. I watched from across the street, hidden behind a newspaper stand. Her eyes darted around, not with pride this time, but with paranoia. She whispered to herself, tapping her nails on the table like a woman trying to solve a riddle. Later, she stormed into the boutique that had cut her off. Her voice cracked as she demanded answers, her hands waving wildly, her face red with shame. The manager, who now worked for me, simply smiled politely and told her nothing could be done. She left in a huff, muttering under her breath, eyes scanning the street as if invisible enemies were laughing at her. She wasn't wrong. At night, she stayed up later than usual, her lights glowing through the curtains long past midnight. I knew because I often walked past, keeping to the shadows. I saw her pacing, phone pressed to her ear, arguing with people who no longer cared. Sometimes, she stopped and stared out the window, her face pale in the moonlight, her lips forming words I couldn't hear. But I could read them anyway. Who is doing this to me? The beauty of it all was that she had no clue. To her, it looked like the world was collapsing by itself. To her, it felt like fate had decided to play its cruel hand. She had no idea that every cut, every humiliation, every loss had my fingerprints on it. And that drove her mad. One evening, I saw her break. She sat on the steps of her apartment building, head buried in her hands, shoulders shaking. People passed by, some staring, some pretending not to see. This was the same woman who once walked those streets with her nose in the air, dripping arrogance. Now she looked like a fallen statue, broken and forgotten. But even in her lowest moments, I saw flashes of her old self. She wasn't done fighting. Not yet. She started asking questions, poking around, trying to connect dots that weren't there. She accused old friends of betraying her, neighbors of spreading rumors, even the bank of having a personal grudge. She was swinging in the dark, trying to land a punch on an enemy she couldn't see. I almost pitied her. Almost. Because while she searched for shadows, I was right there, closer than she realized. She thought her paranoia was just madness creeping in. She didn't know the madness had a face. My face. But patience still whispered in my ear. Not yet. Let her burn a little more. Let her scream at ghosts and beg for answers no one will give her. The lower she sank, the more glorious the reveal would be. And so, I stayed in the dark, watching her crumble under the weight of her suspicions. Watching her claw at walls that kept closing in. She was beginning to sense the storm. But she had no idea that the storm had been her father all along. Desperation makes people reckless, and she was no exception. By now, her life had turned into a collapsing house where every wall caved in at once. But instead of standing still and letting the rubble bury her, she scrambled to grab whatever she could, even if it meant setting fire to what little was left. I watched as she tried to reinvent herself overnight. One day she was begging for favors, the next she was parading through town as if nothing was wrong. She borrowed clothes, pawned off jewelry, and spun stories so wild even a child would laugh at them. She claimed investors were backing her, that she was on the verge of a huge business deal, that she was about to become richer than ever. Lies stacked on lies, all of them trembling on weak legs. Her boldest gamble came when she threw a party. A party she couldn't afford, in a venue she had no right to book. She sent out invitations, called old friends, and begged strangers to attend. She wanted to show the world she was still untouchable. But I knew the truth. I had bought the venue weeks before. I let her plan, let her spend what little she had left, let her invite everyone she hoped would admire her. The night of the party, she arrived draped in a dress she clearly rented, her hair done in a style meant to hide her exhaustion. She forced a smile, raising her glass high as people clapped politely. But as the evening dragged on, the cracks showed. The drinks ran out early. The food was stale. Guests whispered about unpaid bills and rumors of her debts. And then, the manager, my manager, walked in and shut the lights off. The music died, the chatter stopped, and the room filled with uneasy silence. He announced, in front of everyone, that the event was over. No payments had been made, and the venue was no longer available. Guests exchanged looks, some laughed, others walked out shaking their heads. She stood there in the darkness, her face burning red, her hands trembling as her so-called friends slipped away without even saying goodbye. I watched from a corner, unseen, as her mask shattered. For the first time, I saw fear take full control of her. She wasn't just embarrassed, she was defeated. That party was supposed to be her last stand, her final performance as queen. Instead, it became her public execution. But she wasn't done scrambling. After the disaster, she went knocking on doors she had slammed in the past. Old friends, neighbors, even distant relatives. She begged, pleaded, spun new lies, promised returns she could never deliver. Most slammed the door in her face. Some laughed. A few threw insults sharp enough to slice her pride into ribbons. I could see it now, her arrogance melting into desperation, her pride curdling into shame. She was spiraling, and every desperate move only tightened the trap around her. What she didn't realize was that her downfall wasn't chaos. It wasn't chance. It was me. I was the silent architect behind every failure, every humiliation, every door that slammed shut in her face. And as I walked home that night, her humiliation still fresh in my mind, I knew the moment was drawing near. She was almost where I needed her to be, broken, alone, stripped of the lies she once wore like armor. The storm was almost ready to break. And when it did, I would step out of the shadows and show her the face of the man she had betrayed. The man she had thrown away. Her father. Her fall wasn't graceful. It wasn't quiet. It was messy, loud, and humiliating. The kind of downfall people whispered about in grocery store aisles and laughed about in hushed tones over dinner tables. By this time, she had lost almost everything. The car was gone, the jewelry pawned, the friends vanished. Even her apartment, the place she used to boast about, slipped through her fingers. Rent unpaid, notices ignored, and one morning, her things were dragged into the street while she screamed at the landlord. I stood across the road, hidden in plain sight, watching as she clutched at clothes, shoes, and old boxes, tears streaking through the makeup she still tried to wear like a mask. She ended up in a run-down motel on the outskirts of town, the kind of place where the wallpaper peeled like dead skin and the air smelled like mold and regret. From being the woman who once strutted around like royalty, she had now become just another ghost in a place filled with broken people. I could see it in her face whenever I checked in from the shadows. The spark of arrogance that once defined her had dimmed to nothing but a faint ember. Her hair was unkempt, her clothes no longer polished, and her voice, once loud enough to command a room, was now just a whisper of defeat. But the most telling sign wasn't her appearance. It was her eyes. They darted constantly, searching for someone to blame, someone to answer for the invisible hands tearing her life apart. And though she didn't know it yet, those eyes were getting closer to the truth. She wasn't blind anymore. She knew there was something behind it all. One night, I watched her stumble out of the motel, her phone in her hand, her face pale in the neon light. She muttered to herself, pacing back and forth, dialing numbers that no longer picked up. Her lips trembled as she cursed names, cursed fate, cursed the world. And then she stopped, her head dropping into her hands. That was the moment. The exact second she finally realized she was alone. Rock bottom doesn't come with a bang. It comes with silence. A silence so heavy it drowns you. And I saw it swallow her whole that night. But here's the cruel beauty of rock bottom. It's the perfect stage for a reveal. Because when someone has nothing left, no lies to hide behind, no friends to lean on, no pride to cling to, that's when the truth cuts deepest. That's when a ghost stepping out of the shadows can break them completely. I stood in the dark, my fists clenched, my heart pounding with a mixture of rage and satisfaction. For months, I had watched her tumble down the staircase she had built for herself. For months, I had pulled strings from behind the curtain. And now, she was exactly where I wanted her. Soon, she would see me. Not as the father she kicked out. Not as the man she thought she had destroyed. But as the storm that had haunted her every step, the shadow that had torn her kingdom apart piece by piece. Her rock bottom was only the beginning of my rise. The night I chose to finally step out of the shadows was colder than most. The air carried that sharp sting that makes your breath visible, like smoke from a fire you can't put out. She was still at that shabby motel, clinging to the last scraps of dignity she had left. I had waited long enough. It was time. I walked through the cracked pavement leading to the entrance, my footsteps steady, almost echoing in my head like a drumbeat. Every step carried years of sacrifice, betrayal, and patience. She was inside, sitting on a broken chair in the lobby, her hair a tangled mess, her eyes sunken. When I saw her, my heart clenched, not with pity, but with the memory of the girl she once was. The girl who clung to my hand when she was small. That girl was gone, buried under greed and arrogance. She looked up as I approached, and at first, she didn't recognize me. She blinked, squinting, as if trying to match my face with a ghost from her past. And then it hit her. Her lips parted, her face paled, her hands trembled. For a second, I thought she might faint. I didn't say anything right away. Words weren't necessary at first. My presence alone was enough to strike harder than any sentence I could have spoken. She stammered, tried to form excuses, but her voice cracked under the weight of her own shame. I finally spoke, my tone calm but sharp enough to cut glass. I told her that everything she had lost, the parties, the friends, the apartment, the car, hadn't been fate. It hadn't been bad luck. It had been me. The father she had thrown out like garbage. The man she thought would vanish into the streets while she lived off the dream of stealing my fortune. Her face twisted into disbelief, then horror, then rage. She shouted, cursed, demanded to know how I could do this to her. But every word that spilled from her mouth only made her sound smaller, weaker, more pathetic. I reminded her of the night she pointed to the door and told me to leave. I reminded her of every insult, every cold word, every ounce of greed in her eyes. And I told her that night had been the moment I decided her fall wouldn't just happen, it would be orchestrated. The silence that followed was heavier than the cold outside. She stared at me, her chest rising and falling as if the air itself was too heavy to breathe. She tried to defend herself, to twist the story, to play the victim. But her words died in her throat. Because deep down, she knew. She knew this wasn't cruelty. This was justice. I leaned closer, lowering my voice so only she could hear, and told her that money doesn't change people, it reveals them. And she had been revealed. The little girl I once loved had been consumed by greed, and now all that was left was a hollow shell. Her eyes filled with tears, not of remorse, but of fear. Fear that she had finally lost everything. Fear that the man she thought was weak had turned out to be stronger than she could ever imagine. I turned to leave, my footsteps echoing once more. She called after me, her voice breaking, begging, pleading. But I didn't stop. Revenge wasn't in her tears. Revenge was in my silence, in walking away and leaving her with the truth she could never escape. That night, she saw me not as her father, but as the storm that had torn down her false kingdom. And the best part? She finally understood that her destruction hadn't been random. It had been deliberate. My hand. My design. My revenge. When I left that motel lobby, her voice still echoed in my ears. The begging, the pleading, the desperate tone of a woman who finally realized the walls hadn't just collapsed, they had been pushed. By me. Her father. I could have ended it there. Walked away forever and let her drown in the truth. But revenge doesn't stop at a reveal. Revenge ends with a final blow, the kind that leaves no room for rebuilding, no space for second chances. In the weeks that followed, I made sure her downfall wasn't just personal, it was permanent. The debts she had piled up? I bought most of them through shell companies and made sure there would be no mercy. Every unpaid bill, every loan, every favor she owed came knocking all at once. One by one, doors slammed in her face until she had nowhere left to run. Her so-called friends avoided her like a disease. The banks blacklisted her. Even the cheap motels didn't want her anymore once the whispers spread. She became a ghost in the same town she once strutted through like a queen. People who once envied her now pitied her, or worse, mocked her. But the true ending came on a quiet afternoon when she showed up at one of my properties, not realizing it belonged to me. She was asking for work. Not money, not loans, work. The same daughter who had screamed that I was useless, that I didn't deserve a penny of my own winnings, now stood in front of a manager I paid, begging for a chance to clean floors just to survive. The manager called me that night. I laughed, a bitter laugh that came from deep in my chest. My daughter, the one who tried to strip me of dignity, was now asking for scraps in a building I owned. I didn't even have to lift a finger. Karma had done its job, and I had guided its hand. I didn't give her the job. Not because I wanted her to starve, but because some lessons can't be cushioned. She needed to feel the sting of her choices. She needed to understand that betrayal has consequences no apology can erase. And so, she faded into the background of the city. Another lost soul wandering streets she once ruled. Meanwhile, I thrived. My fortune grew, my empire spread, and I lived quietly, never flaunting, never boasting. Power is quieter than people think. True wealth doesn't scream, it whispers. Sometimes, late at night, I think about her. Not with love, not with hate, but with a strange kind of finality. She had written me out of her life the night she kicked me out. All I did was write the ending of her story in return. The lottery didn't just change my life with money. It gave me the chance to see the truth about my own blood. It showed me that loyalty isn't bought, that love without respect is nothing, and that patience can be sharper than any sword. She thought she had buried me that night when she pointed to the door. But she didn't bury me. She planted me. And I grew into the storm that washed her kingdom away. That was my revenge. Not in shouting, not in fighting, but in silence, in patience, in showing her that the man she thought was weak was the one who held all the power. And when the dust finally settled, she was nothing but a memory of betrayal, while I walked forward into a life of quiet victory. Because sometimes, the sweetest revenge isn't about destroying someone. It's about living so well that they can never touch you again, and making sure they know it. Please like this video and subscribe to my channel. That's free and only way to support us. Thank you.